We're going to go over what I spoke about in my last video and portion, step by step, certain little topics that I want to talk about. But, you know, you always hear these spiritual gurus talk about, you know, no mind and don't think. You know what I'm saying? Just stop thinking. When you're thinking, of course, it's more or less the limited side of you, more the ego side of you doing this, the humanity part, the thinking man, which is what separates us over all the other rest of the farm animals. Okay? Now, this is also very important what I'm going to talk about, because the problem with people is they're not thinking, period. So even spiritual people telling you don't think, you're already not thinking. See, people think that mental activity constitutes thinking, and it doesn't. Okay? That's autopilot. See, whatever you're doing now in this moment in time, and you observe the people, places, and things in your environment, you're a product of what you picked up between the ages of 1 through 7 when you were a child. So your thinking mind or your analytical mind, all that thinking mind, that shit wasn't online. You were in your subconscious mind, which is a very powerful part of yourself. Okay? Now, this is the limitless part of yourself, the infinite possibility part of yourself. See, you're a child, you're absorbing like a black hole, like the blob in chaos. You're just absorbing your environment. Doesn't matter what it is, you're eating everything up. Whether it's toxic, whether it's good for you, whether it's masculine, feminine, you're absorbing all that, and it's getting programmed into your body, into your mind. Okay? The root chakra, the heart chakra, right? You don't know racism, you don't know none of that shit, but you pick all that up along the way. That molds your heart space, which is another brain, your solar plexus, which is another brain, your ability to express yourself. You know what I'm saying? How much do you want to shine in this planet? Because your solar plexus is your sun. And if your parents broke you down in the wrong way, you know what I'm saying? And your parents basically didn't let you express yourself. They made you feel like there was consequences. All that got programmed. So you're absorbing everything in your environment. Okay, everything. So now your conscious mind starts to come online. Now you're the individual, right? You're having an individual experience, right? Now you start to express yourself in society based on what you've picked up from the ages of 1 through 7. Okay? Now, this is autopilot. So now in autopilot, you're not thinking. So whatever you dislikes, you start pointing fingers at, you start having victim mentality, right? And that's because, in other words, you grew up, but you're still a child. See, it comes a point where when you do grow up, you start to say, I take responsibility for my actions, or now you're starting to think. It's kind of like this. You ever hear somebody say, and I'm using it from a poverty and abundance standpoint so we can get an understanding, but you ever hear health is wealth? There's a reason why health is wealth, because it gets passed down to your child the same way poverty and abundance gets passed down. So if you're rich, that wealth gets passed down to your child. Because it's not just the money physically that gets passed down, it's the consciousness. The programs get passed down to the child. Right? So now health, for example, there's genetic weaknesses, right, that get passed down to the child. That's what the child has to work with. Now, they'll also implant mind viruses saying that cancer or diabetes or this runs in the family, let's say. And that mind virus is a belief, because your parents are like God, that this runs in the family. Oh my God. Now you're a victim, right? Automatically as a child. But you're eating and acting and doing the same things that your parents are doing that cause them to have those bad ideas called a disease. And it doesn't have to even be just diet or anything like that. Inflammatory reactions. That's why people say when you're inflammatory, hatred, you hold on to anger and all that, that can even cause diseases. Certain chemicals in your body are released whenever you do that. But you are the environment. And the reason you are the environment is because you can observe this by the simplest point. When you see the sun comes up, your brain produces a chemical to keep you awake and alert. And when the sun goes down, the brain produces another chemical to get you sleepy, to go to sleep. So you're basically in tune with nature in that aspect, right? Let's say if it's too cold or too hot outside, you have an internal temperature, which goes by the pineal gland, your thyroid, your metabolism, all that affects if you're in harmony with even those extreme temperatures, where if it's too cold, your body should acclimate to that cold where you won't, freeze to death. You know what I'm saying? Same thing when it's too hot, right? Some people can't even sweat. They don't have an ability to sweat because their body's so stagnant, and sweating's a detoxing effect, right? So they may go out in the heat and they can't stand the heat because they can't even sweat. And when you sweat, it cools you down, doesn't it? It's called perspiration. So do you see these things? Your body has to be working in homeostasis and in harmony for all that to actually be conducive to its environment, right? So when now you have these health issues, right? You're on autopilot because you picked that up from your parents along the way. But let's say you just start to think, well, what caused my parents to get that disease? Now you start to change the eating habits that you were basically brought up to eat. You start to do a little studying. You realize that lifestyle choices weren't serving you. What do you do now? You start to override all these things, but don't forget, it's going to be uncomfortable because you were already used to doing something, and your body's a creature of habit. So if you do that, it's going to feel like shit, maybe for 21 days, because it takes 21 days. Sometimes we're habitual eaters. Sometimes we do things out of habit. We don't even necessarily really need it or want it. We just habitually have to do it, or we think we have to do it, actually. Some people think they have to eat because you're programmed to think that you have to eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Even though you wake up and you're not hungry, you'll still eat breakfast because you think, and we're programmed to think that breakfast is the most important meal of the day. So now you disconnected your gut from your brain, which, I've heard my mom tell me, hey, eat slower, because it gives your brain a chance for the stomach to know that it's full. There's a connection where your brain knows that your stomach is full, but it takes a little bit of time. There's times where I eat a meal and I love it so much that I'm like, yo, I want another plate. But then they take a while because they're prepping it. And by the time I get it, I'm like, damn, I really don't even want it now. I wanted it before. But if I would have gotten it quicker, I would have overate. But the fact that I took my time, I didn't overeat. Even here in this realm, with other things such as manifesting or even what you're eating as far as information, it takes time. Digest what you got. You get what I'm saying? Because what happens is that people start to listen to a lot of information and starts to form belief systems. And these belief systems is no different than stagnation in the body, because you have to hold on to a belief system. So you should basically listen to shit, process it, and alchemize it. And then when you alchemize it, you're never going to be regurgitating information, but what you did from what you heard. Because see, when I hear somebody speaking, that person is me. So I'm not looking at it as I'm taking somebody's information. See, because what I did was I took that information, internalized it, processed it, alchemized it, right? And I let go of the belief system, but I actually took the nutrients out of what was in the information, right? But then what's the energy signature behind the person? Because some people they're complaining. You could tell when somebody is in a fucked up state. You get what I'm saying? And you can experience that, but some people who are not aware, their life may be worse upon listening to an individual than it was before you heard that individual. So information doesn't cause sorrow. It's what the energy signature behind that person that causes sorrow. See, there's a Christ consciousness. Even people who are activists and they start fighting for these animals and whatnot, they're not rooted out of love. See, the whole thing is, if you had a communication with these animals, you started to see the connectiveness in all things, people would just naturally want to stop eating meat, right? But then, you ever hear, if you change yourself, the world around you changes? But it all starts from self first, getting to know thyself first. But you start attacking people because they eat meat. Not only are you infringing in their own free will, but you're also kicking their ego online. And it just becomes a battle of like dick swinging contests. Who's got the bigger dick? And with this mentality, you cannot change the world that way. It's like somebody pushing religion on somebody. If they're not ready for it, or if they're pushing it in a way where you can see that somebody's just doing it because they're pushing an agenda to some extent. It's just empty, because I've spoke to religious people, and the reason they believe in God or Jesus or whatever ideas they have of this character is because their parents told them, and they grew up just believing in it. No different than a child never stopped believing in Santa Claus and they become an adult believing in Santa Claus. It's the same thing. Not to say that Santa Claus doesn't exist or Jesus or God doesn't exist. The whole thing is that, how does it exist to you though? How does it exist to you? So when you start to talk about, let's say, I'm going to go back to what I was telling you about passing down generational wealth. So somebody now becomes aware of their environment, okay? And when they became aware, they changed the programming, right? They changed the way they eat. They changed their living conditions. You could even, and I spoke about it in my last video, you may even want to go, even though you don't, let's say you don't have the money, you may even want to go and participate in an environment that you can't even afford. But the fact that you're there, you're swimming in those waters, that's all that matters. And when you have somebody that you know, even better, right? But networking, right? How the art of expressing yourself. But the thing is, you got to become conducive to that environment, right? So let's say, for example, you were originally in poverty, right? But the reason you were there is because you're constantly complaining about bills and all that bullshit. Do you think that you'll be conducive by going into an abundant environment and going there with that same mentality, talking to these people about complaining about bills and all that kind of shit? You're not going to be conducive to that environment. See, in that instance, the best thing to do is keep your mouth shut. And sometimes just observe, right? Observe. And observe how it would feel if you were there, but you're already there. That's the whole thing. And in Christ consciousness, you could start to see the connectedness between you and those people, and you will start to feel and see and say, "Here I am, Lord." But not to say, "Here I am," like you're in a place. No, "Here I am," meaning this is all you. That's all you. And because you were thinking, you put yourself there, but you're not conducive to it because your programs are overriding it. You slowly but surely, with repetition and symbolism, you start to change yourself. Sometimes it requires trauma. That's why some people who got kicked out of their house and start to live in the street and they had to sleep in their car, that's a traumatic experience that forces them to change though, right? That's why some people who are like in the worst of conditions have the ability to become very rich because now they got kicked in the ass so hard that it basically forced them to change, right? If you're in a toxic relationship with a girl and you don't change yourself, you'll attract the same person in a different body. It's always going to require you changing yourself first. The mind is all, the universe is mental. As within, so without, as above, so below. So, this is not, see, I don't design these to be motivational videos, but in actuality, they're more informative videos where you channel angles of light to some extent, okay? And you plant certain seeds, okay? But these seeds are meant to be grown to get you closer to God, okay? And some people may not want to see that because at the end of the day, I'm a man speaking on camera. So when you ask who wrote the Bible, man wrote the Bible, right? But we put so much faith and trust into that, right? But if you look and read the Bible literally, then you're externalizing your power. When you take these things and look at them allegorically, you're internalizing this information. Automatically, you start to see the connectiveness in things outside of you. Meaning you don't even have to do as much research. For some strange reason, even information just starts getting attracted to you. But you would have to know what it is that you're reading and for what reason it was presented to you to begin with. Like I saw Billy Carson one time saying to everybody, study the Emerald Tablet. And I said, no, fuck the Emerald Tablet. I don't need to study anything unless it comes into my existence to some extent and I feel it within me to look up the Emerald Tablet, because based on something I've already been looking up, then it's going to tie certain things in. But if I look at the Emerald Tablets, it ain't no different than just religifying something and looking at it again as another religion. Somebody tells you, study the Bible is going to get you closer to God. Does it really do that though? Does it really do that? It's a book full of words that are written in a certain way. Like, you spell words. They're spells to get you in a hypnotic state, right? The same way neuro-linguistic programming is designed. But if you're reading it from a perspective of outside of you, then you're just going further and further away from God. And the reason I say this is because you're in your space. But the further out of your space you go, you're a space cadet. Okay? The same way they want you to think you can leave this planet and go into outer space, space cadet. Stay grounded in your space. Okay? Stay grounded in your space. When you observe your environment, if it's not to your liking, you have the ability to change it. But it requires a little thinking. Now, when you think and overthink things, don't forget, when you're thinking on how to do something, you're in your limited mind state. This is why they say if you want to manifest something and you visualize it, you hold it, right, in your perception, all right, from the mind's eye, you create an emotion around it. It's already yours. Thinking is thinking about the process. You shouldn't be thinking about the process. You're already there. That process is taken over by God. So that's why they tell you don't think. But at the end of the day, if you don't think, you're on autopilot and you don't know where you're going. Like a leaf flowing around on a windy day. In the words of Bob Proctor. So you have to have direction. If you're on a ship, you have to have directions on where to go or you'll be lost at sea. Okay? If you go into outer space, you're a space cadet. There's no directions in space, outer space. No up, down, left, right, nothing. But you're in this physical realm having an experience where you have a perception of time. You have a perception of experiences with people, places, and things. You have experience and a sense of direction. The same way the animals have a sense of direction. Automatically, they know to fly south for the winter, right? Do you have a sense of direction? You're disconnected from your animalistic state. It's actually running you rather than you having control of this animal. This is why sometimes when I mentioned about people just having babies randomly, it's like you birthing things into existence here, talking shit or speaking things into existence from the wrong mind state. You're birthing things into existence, but what happens after that? You have to have responsibility for what you birthed into existence. But many people, upon what they've birthed, due to unawareness maybe, all they do now is they're in victim mentality, pointing fingers, and then what happens? Let's say God, the universe, whatever you want to categorize it as, your now moment is your most empowered moment. So the moment you're complaining, pointing fingers at what you just did, that you created, well, the universe is neutral. There's no bad and good. It's just going to keep repeating and giving you more of that. So somebody who's in Christ consciousness or works with God, Jesus keeps bringing them things and bringing them closer, to the things they want in this physical realm or giving them information. In your now moment, you're manifesting more of that too, right? If you believe you're powerful, you have power. If you believe you're disempowered, you have no power. Your belief is your strongest superpower. Where does your energy come from? Depends how powerful you are. And I'm also going to talk about the topic of no fapping, semen retention, and all that bullshit that people want to claim online, which is just another religion. Everything is religified. Everything. And it just puts you in a fucking movement, in a space. It's a movement. They move your mind and polarize it to an idea, and you create an opposer. So you're basically being Satan, because the word Satan is opposer, adversary. So people want to say I'm godly, but even if you're saying I am godly, but I oppose the devil, you're doing the same thing. You're Satan, because you're being the opposer. And in actuality, it's you sit as the neutral center ground. These things are meant to be used as tools in your reality. Conductivity. You're looking at it as bad and good. That's like me looking at an electrical charge and a negative charge, and then having the neutral ground and plugging it to a wall, and I'm saying one side is bad, one side is good. There is no one side is bad, one side is good. I need both for me to have power and energy to connect my appliance. You ever hear Om when people are meditating? How do you measure conductivity? Not Om like OM, like the meditative Om, it's OHM. But that Om is the same shit. So that's your conductivity. But you have to use a masculine and feminine energy within everybody that everybody has. The expression that you have here, some people are man, some people are woman. That means that they are expressing more dominantly that energy in this physical realm. Because that's what you were vibrating to before you were born. Now, start to talk about reincarnation and whatnot. What were the odds that you're born here as a human doing what you're doing right now? We talk about evolution and de-evolution, right? Based on cause and effect. How do you know that anything under you isn't there due to cause and effect? How do you know what you're doing now is what you're doing? Because that's always what you've always been doing. But there is no such thing as the past. There's no such thing as the future. Everything is right now. But whatever I do later depends on what I'm doing now anyway. And whatever just happened doesn't matter. But if I stay in the past, I'm going to keep in my now what I experience because I'm attached to it, and I keep bringing it into whatever future timeline you have. Hey, I'm just a man talking on camera though. But it comes a time where we have to grow up, right? I'm going to now make other videos on other topics that I mentioned in my very important video. And if you have anything to share or add, leave it in the comments. And like, share, and subscribe. We will talk soon.